Welcome to the Intelligence Briefing Live What's the Buzz, where leaders and hands-on experts share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today we'll talk about the 4 generative AI challenges that you cannot ignore. And who better to talk about it than someone who's passionately sharing advice on them? Quentin Reul. Hey Quentin, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Wonderful. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Quentin Reul. I'm originally from Belgium. Spent my bachelor degree and my PhD in the UK, and I've now been in Chicago, in the US for 10 years. Um, on the side of work, I do martial arts with my kids and my wife, and it's a lot of fun. From a work perspective, I worked at Fortune 500 before, and I'm currently looking at helping companies with their journey into the AI strategies by adopting UX, but also the technology and the deep knowledge in technology in doing so.
That's awesome. Again, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I know you've been sharing a lot of your advice and experiences on social media lately, and that's where we connected on LinkedIn. So super excited to have you on, and also curious what the community has in terms of questions and what they would love to learn more about. Now, folks, for those of you in the audience, if you're just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is again today. And also, don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter, the AI Memo, under intelligence-briefing.com/newsletter, so you can stay up to date how you can successfully lead AI projects in your business. I also have a book coming out, the AI Leadership Handbook. I actually get the first copy in the mail today, so I cannot show it to you yet, but you can sign up for the wait list at aileadershiphandbook.com. I know Quentin is already on that wait list, so join him and many, many others too. It'll be out in September 10th. So with that out of the way, should we play a little game to kick things off?
Yep.
Wonderful. So hang on. Let's see. This game is called In Your Own Words. And when I hit the buzzer, the wheels will start spinning. When they stop, you'll see a sentence. And would love for you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind and why, in your own words. To make it a little more interesting, you only have 60 seconds for your answer. And folks, for those of you in the audience, you can participate too. Put your answer and why in the chat as well. So, Quentin, are you ready for What's the Buzz?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. Almost. Here we go. It is a live show. So, if AI were a fruit, what would it be? 60 seconds on the clock, and go.
I think I would be an apple, in as much as you have a lot of layers, and it tastes good if you eat the skins. But if you remove the skin and the layers, and you try like to dig deeper and eat the apple, the more you know, and the better you can leverage it.
Wonderful. And I think there's a lot there at the core as well that you need to know about, and know how to get close to it. So wonderful.
And it grows again if you use the seeds. So it's kind of regenerative.
Perfect. I love that answer. Excellent. And I see comments here from Ashwin. He's joining us from Hyderabad, and he said, yeah, something sweet. Exactly. I think that's where we're still at in that phase where it's sweet, and we're figuring out what else can we do with it. Can we make apple pie and applesauce and apple cider and whatever else? So very versatile too. Okay, so with that out of the way, why don't we talk about the topic of the show, the 4 generative AI challenges that you need to know about. And you know, if you look at the history, the last 2.5 years, ever since ChatGPT has come on the map, I think there's been not only so much hype, but also already so much maturity, so much evolution, that I'm curious, what are you seeing? How is generative AI evolving the business strategy and the impact on business strategies?
Yeah, I think like if we look at what happened like November 2022 to maybe like July 2023, a lot of companies had the FOMO, like the fear of missing out on leveraging generative AI, and they were looking at a lot of different use cases and what they could do it, what advantage and what gap that was filling compared to more traditional machine learning. out of the box, you had thousands of data points that you can now use in models that were pre-trained for problems that were complex, compared to before, where you needed to spend years creating the training sets to generate that. But I think now there is a realization that maybe the direction that the big LLM providers like OpenAI or Anthropic and where the companies are going is not necessarily in the same direction. In as much as OpenAI is promoting, artificial general intelligence, and I think that for the businesses where their value is more in narrow AI. It is not. They will gain value in content creation and marketing by leveraging AGI, but it's where they are very specific to their niche that really the differentiation is going to come. So I think that there we're going to start seeing a realization that one, not all use cases that you add could be fulfilled with the large language models. If you want to do the prediction of what to put on your shelf tomorrow, LLM is not going to help you. But if you're, as I say, like trying to create content or you're trying to answer questions, it's there and it can help you.
See, that's the part where I'm always curious to see the two be combined. We know that LLMs hallucinate, they have factual inaccuracies, they have some biases, they are not even able to do certain tasks that narrow AI and even predictive analytics and machine learning can do. But I feel if you combine the two, or if you create a prompt where you substitute some information in some variables and you put in those data points that you have generated using other proven technologies and methods, then it's a good vehicle, right, to leverage the best of both worlds. What are you seeing there?
Well, I think that's like what I was working on a Fortune 500, and we were working with a lot of different models and GPT-4, and there was, to be honest, not a lot of use cases for which we needed something different than GPT-4 because they were generic enough. Now, I think that once you get to the point that you just mentioned, which I tend to call or refer to as a cost to be wrong. So the higher the cost to be wrong, the higher you have a risk of hallucination. If your cost to be wrong is nil or zero, I call it creativity. And I think that that's another thing that business need to think about, is that there are plenty of use cases where the creativity is important and actually useful. Like I have the blank page syndrome. So whenever I tried to write, and I wrote a PhD and it took me a long time, and if I had a generative AI, it would have been much faster. I get stuck on the page and I want to rewrite everything. But the LLMs are very good for that problem. But if I try to make a judgment, let's say predict or give a treatment to a patient, or predict how to apply law for particular problems, well, I can't be wrong. I can cause someone's going to jail, or I can cause someone's death. So I think that that's where we need to look at the problem at a different scale. And I think that what is being done with the AU Act, where they have that different level of risk for assessment. And more recently, I saw that the IEEE is actually following that same methodology in terms of accrediting whether your solution is going to be ethical. And they look at it from the perspective of low risk, medium risk, high risk, and an acceptable risk. And things that are considered an acceptable risk are things like social scoring, where, for example, you would be in HR and you would use whether people are attending meetings or whether they're sending emails as the way to determine whether or not they're productive and whether they should keep or stay in the company or not.
Now, I think those are really important aspects in coming back to that challenge, right? It's first of all understanding what can you use the technology for, and what can you maybe use other technologies for that are better suited, that are maybe cheaper, that are maybe more cost effective to operate and to build. Certainly, everything has a trade-off, but again, you don't need to have a large language model for so many use cases. Now, I'm curious, folks, for those of you in the audience, if you have a question for Quentin or I, please put it in the chat. We'll take a look in a minute or two and pick up those questions.
And I think like to the last point that you made, Andreas, with regard to, not every problem is a generative AI problem. I think that that's a responsibility of technology leader to realize that and to have a deep enough understanding of the technology to be able to advise the business and their partners that, yes, you could use generative AI or you could put an AI label, but that doesn't mean that you're going like to have a better product for your customers. Because at the end of the day, as a business, how are you making money? What is your return on investment? It is about delighting your customers by providing a solution that is intuitive. If integrating AI makes it more complicated for the solution or the problem or the process that people are going through, or you're not really helping your customers and you're not necessarily going like to get the return that you're looking for.
Now, you mentioned you've worked at Fortune 500s. I did a bit of work in previous roles in corporate with Fortune 500 as well, and I heard leaders say just recently at the beginning of the year, if it's not generative AI, it's not AI, or we're not pursuing it. And I think that's misleading in so many ways, and it's challenging, it's troublesome. But to your point, right? You need to know when you need to use a large language model, when you use your logistic regression or other capabilities. And I'm wondering there from your experience, how can you assess, the fitness, if you will, of different LLMs, of different approaches, if you want to solve a particular need, so you don't run into the trap of, if it's not Gen AI, we're not doing it.
Yeah, I think, there's been a lot of work that has been done in evaluation and benchmarks. And I think they're providing good insights as to whether or not a model is better than another model. But I think that we have to be very careful when it comes to be looking at benchmark, is that they're not designed for your narrow AI problem. They are designed for very generic problem. The coding problem is looking at different language, but it's probably not very extensive on SQL. It's also somewhat misleading because we have seen some companies using part of the benchmark as their training set, and that causes overfitting because it does what it says like it's going to do because you train it on. So I think that that's definitely one aspect. It's like you can use the benchmark as a pre-selection for what you're going to look based on the type of problem that you have. But I think after that, you really have to test it. Like you have the chatbot arena where you can put two different LLMs side by side, and you have your prompt, and you see which one is going to give the best results. And it's an interesting problem if you are creative. But I think if you are a company, you really have to invest on a golden set. So you probably don't need as many data points as you needed before. Like a good training set or a good golden set of 500 data points is probably going to be sufficient. But that is going to give you an ability to test the different models over time. Not only the first time as you're creating, but a lot of these models are evolving very rapidly. And because they're offered as SaaS model, they go today, tomorrow the new version is, the old version is gone. And there is an opaque problem in as much as you don't know what training data is going in. So you don't know whether the fitness of your LLM before and when you do your previous assessment is going to remain as you're doing your assessment. So monitoring and having that golden set for ongoing monitoring is very important.
That's an important point that you're bringing up, and I feel that hasn't been getting as much attention lately as it has been probably a year ago, right? As models change, even if your API stays the same, but if the LLM underneath changes from GPT-3 to 3.5 to 4 to 4.0 to whatever is next, you need to do your regression testing. Again, you need to test if the same prompts work. We know that between 3.5 and 4, there are differences, right? In differences in the creativity and other aspects of these models and underneath. So you need to build that into your plan as well, and you need to make sure that you have resources and you have budget to do all these changes, and especially if vendors are deprecating models, that you can react fast enough to put in the new ones and give yourself some flexibility. Yeah,
and it's very much trial and errors. At the end of the day, to give you an example, as I mentioned, I have the the white page syndrome, and I started creating an application to create blogs, because most of the solution that exists can get you somewhere, but it was not giving me like the solution that I wanted. And I used Gemini out of the box, like, and I was writing my prompt, and my goal was to create blogs that were of a certain length, either in time or in number of words. And when you do LLMs and it fails the first time, what do? You go back and you change your prompt, because it's the cheapest thing you can do. And you tell the LLM to actually rewrite the prompt in a way that it would understand it himself. So it will provide more context. It will write like the information in with the right level of instructions and so forth. But you get like to do that for 4 or 5 times, and you realize that it's not the prompt the problem. And in the particular case, I did some digging, and what I realized after a while is that there was no training data about length in Gemini, and therefore no understanding of that. It could predict like the next token, but because there wasn't a notion of length as part of the training data, it was not able like to follow my instruction to the end. So I think that that's where you really need like to test, and framework like LangChain are very useful for that, because they provide you with an easy way to integrate with different providers in a quick way. About a year and a half ago, if you were on Azure, the only model that you had were the OpenAI models. Like, that has changed now with the Azure AI Studio, where you can have access to Llama, and they have an integration through Hugging Face. But before that, you were stuck with one thing. So at least now you have a bit more of that connection. But I think that something like LangChain, definitely at the POC or the early analysis stage, is the best thing like to use. I wouldn't not necessarily use that framework in production, because it's very heavy and leverage a lot of other libraries. But in terms of doing that research aspect, like what we used to call ADA in the more traditional machine learning, if you do that with something like LangChain, then you're going like to get faster results, and you are going to be able like to do that comparison much faster as well.
Awesome. And just looking at the chat here, somebody's saying if I've asked it one time if it can count smiley face, it can't. I'm sure it thought it could, but we've seen those examples. It's a good reminder as well. Now, we've already talked about this notion of don't give in too much into this hype of everything should be generative AI. We talked about, hey, there's some evaluation frameworks, methodologies that you can use. But what are some of the technologies that you're seeing that can address those challenges of generative AI?
Well, I think LangChain is definitely one that can help you with that first integration. I think it's so difficult today, like, to stay up to date with all the tools. Every day, like, I'm on a TLDR, getting my news fix on what is happening in AI, and many other newsletter. And there's just no way you can keep up with all the tools. You have Llama, File, you have a lot of things that are happening. The one that I particularly use is Ollama. And one of the reasons is that I don't necessarily, especially when I do investigation by myself, I don't really want like to pay money like to a cloud provider. And then it's which cloud provider to use, which is not always that straightforward. So Ollama has really been able like to help me with executing a range of different LLMs on my machine, like from a Llama 3.0 instruct 7 billion to much smaller phi models, and trying to understand as well what type of problem are going like to be the best one, because we spoke about different aspects, but completion as opposed to chat, that also has a totally different aspect. Like, I was for example, I was asking a normal LLM, I think it was the Llama, to write a blog, and I'd given the instruction, and the Llama model just gave me back the instruction. But then I used like the Llama instruct, and I provided like the same prompt through the Llama instruct, and it created like the blog that I wanted. So it's again like with these trial and error that you will find like some of these aspect of it and be able like to address it as we go forward.
I think that's a really important point as well, right? Do your evaluation, especially now that there is so much choice, and it seems like it only keeps getting bigger and more complex. What do you use for what? Do your evaluation and see what type of task do you have, what model performs well or even better than others. There's one question from Jennifer here in the chat, and she says, hey, you mentioned that LangChain is heavy and not suitable in production. Can you share more about this? Or maybe qualify what you meant when it comes to LangChain and similar tools.
Yeah, so LangChain, because it was designed like as a community and trying like to address all of the different LLMs, it brings TensorFlow, it brings PyTorch. So as you're creating an image, let's say a Docker image based on LangChain, it's going to be bloated. I think to recall it was something like 6 GB, and my prompt and my code was maybe about like 200K. And it has an implication on how you are going to productionalize it. A lot of the use cases that I see are still very much on demand. You know, it's not that you have a lot of use cases that are flow where your LLM is going like to run 24/7 and processing content all the time. So one way that you're going like to use like to minimize your cost and be able to scale is something like Lambda or serverless, depending on whatever infrastructure you are. But there are limitations. Like, for example, Lambda doesn't support Docker images to be more than a certain amount of memory. So now you have to create layers on top. So you are adding complexity by using something like LangChain. That has got a lot of things that may be useful, but if you're doing OpenAI, well, you don't need like to have access to Oracle Cloud infrastructure. You don't need access like to Bedrock because you're not going like to use any of these components. Whereas if you are using like directly the OpenAI or the Microsoft Azure API, you know, it's going like to be much leaner because it's only going like to have what is necessary to do the job.
Wonderful. Thank you for summarizing that. I think that was really tangible and some good advice there. What are some of the complexities that you inherit when you go down a certain path? You also mentioned that, you know, you don't have like a continuous loop, or it's not always on, depending on the use cases that you see, especially in enterprise. To me, that comes back to data, to pipelines, these kind of topics. And you alluded to that earlier. Yes, large language models help us get to production faster. We might not necessarily need to have a data scientist or be a data scientist to get something out there, at least something that's good enough. But I'm curious, what are you saying? What's the role of data still when it comes to LLMs in that current landscape, especially looking at regulation? At the beginning, you talked about the EU AI Act and IEEE. What role does data play there?
Yeah, I think it goes back like to the goal as well of the companies like OpenAI and AGI, like as I mentioned earlier, and Narrow AI. Like if you take like a large language model that is going like to include a lot of information and you want to apply it to a narrow problem, like what you have in your business, well, trying like to make things unlearn that may be causing hallucination is not that easy. Now, if you take a smaller model like a phi model or something else, and you fine tune it with your own data, which you've been gathering for many, many years, then now you actually have that unfair advantage that you want to have against your competitor. Because if you're all working out of GPT-4 without any data that is local to your problem or local to what you've built over the years, well, you have no, you're no different than the other companies that is using GPT-4. Now, if you're using your data and you're integrating that either through few-shot learning, but more generally, like I think it would be like through fine tuning on smaller model, well, that's the point at which you can differentiate like the work shooting. And today, like from Gemini to H2O, there's so many platforms that are making it easier for people to fine tune their model. And the cost of fine tuning is also much lower than what it used to be. Like if you think about pre-generative AI, when you needed to have 100 thousands or hundreds of thousands of data points to train your model. While for fine tuning, you need maybe 1,000 or 2,000, and that has proven like to already like show like remarkable difference from using a model out of the box. And to be honest, there are certain problems for which an LLM is never going like to address the problem, even though it's a generation. Like if you think about relational database or knowledge graphs, and every query-based languages, yes, there's been like some training on the models for SQL and the SQL syntax. But in a lot of these cases, that syntax then need to map to the underlying data model, which is unknown. So to really be efficient at creating queries that are going like to go with your data, you need like to fine tune it to your schemas, to your tables, or to whatever else you have used to express that data. Otherwise, you're only going like to have garbage in and garbage out, and you're not going like to get the answers that you're looking for.
Awesome. I love that one, because I think that's such an important one in business, where there is so much data, and that's the key differentiator that makes your business unique, that makes your processes unique, that gives you the edge, and has been doing that for a number of years. So bringing that into your LLM application to make the output more specific, or the summarization, or the recommendations, if you will, like writing assistant type things, or tweaking things, I think that's really key. So thank you for highlighting that as our fourth challenge, that you still need data if you want to continue differentiating and not be like, sound like, do things that everybody else is doing as well. Now, Quentin, we're getting close to the end of the show, and I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today.
Yeah, the first one is a quote that an old colleague of mine used to have. It's fall in love with a problem. I mean, like the customer problems, the narrow problems that you're trying to solve, not the solution. And in this case, generative AI. It doesn't apply to all the problems that you may have. 2, as we spoke about data is still your differentiator. You may have spent a lot of money doing a data warehouse over time. It's probably translated now into a data swamp, but you have that data, and you are able like to take like a small slice of it and put it back into your model and fine tune it to your problem. And really that's the last one. Data-driven companies were already with big data going like to be the differentiator, but I think with the AI, it is going like to be the game changer. And I get confused when I hear companies that were data companies becoming AI companies, because I'm pretty sure that in a few months they would have to change their labels back to data companies, because that's going like to be the true reason that's going to resonate to their customer a lot better than AI company.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much. And maybe one question: how can people that have joined to today's session, or listened to it, watched it, connect with you and learn more about what you do, and maybe how you can help them?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also on X, and I have recently started a YouTube channel where I'm putting the recordings of different assignment that I've been given at different presentations. So I'm trying to curate the material as I go along. I also have written a few blogs about how to take the problem of generative AI from inception and using things like jobs to be done framework, all the way to how to consider it, how to charge, and how like to monetize like your solution, depending on how you are applying the content and whatever else. So all of that is on my page, and you can reach out to me. Yeah.
Awesome, wonderful. So folks, do make use of that opportunity and reach out to Quentin for more advice and insights. Now, Quentin, again, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise with us. I think it was a great session, and I learned a lot, and I hope you and the audience did as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. See you next time for another round of the Intelligence Briefing Live. What's the Buzz? Bye-bye.